So now I have one more talk, and then I want to say thank you so much for allowing me to MC you guys today. And when you go next, you will hear the wonderful voice of my colleague Heron. But next, we have two presenters, Randall Manning, who is an occupational therapy student and a researcher working with UTMB's medical prototyping lab. He is interested in sensory substitution, product design, and its applications for therapy. We also have Vivek Ananda, who is a medical student and researcher working in UTMB's medical prototyping lab, and his interests are neurological rehabilitation, PM&R, and pediatrics. The talk that they are going to have is called Amp Touch, Adaptable Listening Prosthetics for Sensory Loss. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Vivek Ananda. I am a third-year medical student at the University of Texas Medical Branch down in Galveston, Texas. And I am very interested in the field of physical medicine and rehabilitation. It's a newer field in medicine, but within it, I am very interested in spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, as well as the interventions that can be done to manage it.
Yep, and I'm Randall Manning. I have a bachelor's in kinesiology and exercise science with a focus in biomechanics. And then I'm finishing up my doctorate in occupational therapy with a focus in assistive technology. And we're working at the UTMB prototyping lab under Dr. Chacin.
And as we begin today, I'd like to pose you guys a question to think about. Is it possible for us to feel without our fingers? And as we think about this, I'd like to tell you guys a little story. This story is about John Powers, an artist. On May 19th, John Powers was cutting wood on a table saw when the table saw kicked back. It dragged his hand through the blade and severed his thumb and ring finger and injured his middle and index. Luckily, his pinky was spared. When wheeled into surgery, he talked to the people there, and he said a really poignant statement that I think tells us a lot about the importance of his work. And he said that, "I think with my hands." We have a couple images here of his work, and it shows us it's a very physical, very real kind of art that requires your hands.
So a little bit more about the open paw. So this is the open call that John created during his rehab process. So this was a call to engineers, designers, and artists. He wanted to create a movable feast with his hands. But what really spoke to me as an occupational therapist and as a clinician was this last part. But first, I need to be able to pick things up and hold them. Because, we can create all these fantastic, delicious things, but, if you're not able to function, kind of what's the point?
So as our lab began to think about John's open paw, we came up with some issues with the current status quo regarding prosthetics. And one big thing is that current prosthetic technology lacks meaningful sensory substitution and often requires visual input to use a prosthetic. This limits the functionality of the prosthetic, increases mental load, and also contributes to device abandonment. In addition, the sensory substitution that is there is often directed toward functional grip force attenuation and movement restoration. So if you're picking up a cup, making sure you don't crack it, rather than feeling how the cup feels. In addition, amputation has a lot of wide-ranging impacts. One big thing that I'm very interested in is the neurological impacts that it has, as well as things like phantom sensation, telescoping, and phantom pain that can really affect one's function as well as quality of life. And next, the available medical interventions that we have, like targeted sensory innervation and nerve grafting, are invasive, expensive, and importantly, don't offer any guarantee of success. And finally, prosthetics are still incredibly expensive and difficult to obtain. Even though we have really cool things like we heard about yesterday with the open source leg, affordable, timely, and innovative solutions still are needed. So this is our product, it's called the Amp Touch, and it's a proof of concept that is a simple, low cost, and most importantly, a non-invasive alternative that delivers tactile information via auditory feedback. So it leverages a set of off-the-shelf components, being a contact microphone, a Bluetooth transmitter, a receiver, and a headphone to deliver how what you're touching feels like to your ears. And two prototypes have been made. One is a custom variant for John that replaces the distal phalanx of his right thumb, as well as one that can wrap around healthy and prosthetic fingers to make sure that this technology is accessible to all.
So we started this off. This was based on the research of Paul Baccarita and Gordon Lundberg. But we kind of started this process with what we had in the lab. So what you're looking at is we just had an Arduino, some microprocessors, a microphone, and a speaker. This piece was really just kind of more of like a proof of concept just to make sure the whole thing worked, and it kind of did. We were able to hear the stuff with it, but we had power regulation issues and volume output issues. We fried a couple Arduinos and microprocessors, so we kind of moved over to more of a traditional prototyping. Moved over to more traditional prototyping. We used a breadboard, and this is where we really kind of tested the different types of microphones. So we were trying to decide between condensers or piezo microphones, and this is where we decided to focus on the condensers, just because it's a little more, it's stronger, it has better sound fidelity and provides more nuanced sounds. But we did decide to keep the piezos for a different model, just because of the smaller profile, and it is particularly sensitive. Yeah. So at the end of that one, we decided we were still having regulation and power volume issues with that one, so we moved over to more of like a traditional hack. So this is a Bluetooth, no, it's a wireless microphone that we kind of hacked. So we opened it up. I put in a stronger and longer wire, and we embedded the microphone into the fingertip. And then we also added some elastic hand straps to hold it in place on the wrist. And then we removed the male end of the earpiece and put on a female end so it can just plug directly right into the transmitter or the receiver. So this is version 2.2. This is the second one. So we added the dual finger cuffs for a couple reasons. One, it provides a little more natural sensation experience, because usually whenever you kind of rub textures together, you're doing it between your fingers. And then also it's just, you can just slip it right on over your fingers or other prosthetics. So it's quite easy installation. So this is what we sent to John, though. So we sent him two types of we sent him both of the products. Then we also sent him two testing kits, which I'll go over a little bit more in a second. So the first one, this is a stereognosis kit. So if you guys don't know what stereognosis is, this is kind of your ability to see with your hands. So what this, how it looks is, say if you're searching through your backpack or your purse, and you're trying to find your keys without looking, you're trying to searching through and you're like, okay, that's my chapstick, that's my phone, that's my wallet, that's some mints. Then you finally find your keys or your phone. Like that's stereognosis. So whenever we do this in like traditional medical settings, we though you kind of pre-discuss the products or the items that are in the kit, so the person knows what they could be looking for, but the vision is obscured. But we did it a little different this time. So we did it with he was not aware of what the items were in the kit, and he also did it with vision obscured. We decided to do it this way because we really wanted to kind of test the device and see how like how capable it was. But he was able to do it. He got all of them. Took him about 15 minutes to do it the first time. Then we did 3 other rounds. So the second one, we did it with a non-involved hand. That took him about 4 minutes. And then we did it again with the device, with the involved hand, with the device off. That took him about 3 minutes. And then we did it one more time with the device on, and that took him about 4 minutes. He did mention that the foam disc was kind of difficult to identify, and the shell was also a little difficult, but that's kind of like an odd object. Most people don't run into that. But, you know, we're from Galveston, so I kind of had to slip a little something of us in there. And then also there's that string. So that's a pesky little string. So it's just kind of hard to find that down at the bottom of the packages and stuff, and just kind of pick it up was just kind of difficult. And so for the fabric discrimination test, so yeah, he was able to get most of these. So kind of starting from the top left, you have a synthetic silk, then you have cotton swatch, then you have a ripstop nylon, then there's a piece of wood, denim, paper towel, synthetic fur, and then the bubble wrap. So he was able, like, again, most of these, he did comment that the denim was particularly like unique and had a unique sound signature. So that one was like kind of nice to interact with. And the same thing with the bubble wrap. I mean, bubble wrap's fun. So everybody can enjoy playing with some bubble wrap. And he did mention that the cotton was difficult to identify just because it's particularly thin and just kind of hard to manipulate, and it didn't have a super strong sound signature. And then the wood, I think he initially identified it as plastic, but it's particularly smooth. And I also think it might have been a composite material, so it's not just wood.
So our findings when talking with John were really positive, and we were excited to hear that the device did have function and it did allow John to discriminate objects. So first, talking about stereognosis, John was able to correctly identify 13 out of the 13 objects in the pouch after some time, which does show that the amp touch does provide the user an ability to have stereognosis. There is a caveat that John did state that his pinky does retain some sensation, so that it's not a perfect experiment, but what we aim to take away from that specific test is that it does have that discriminatory ability. And when going into fabric discrimination, John went into this blind. He couldn't see anything and was able to identify 6 out of the 8 fabrics using the amp touch, which we thought was really positive. This shows that not only is the amp touch able to tell you about just the shape of things, but also when you just feel it, what is it, which is a really important characteristic of what we wanted to achieve with the device. Some other findings that we had along the way was that replacing the appendage didn't require too many tools, and swapping between them was feasible. So this item does allow us to know that the amp touch could be used in specific situations and doesn't have to be a daily use kind of device. Finally, 2 other really interesting things that we found was that density was able to be determined by generating impulse sounds or tapping. So by tapping the device on an object, you could approximate what its density was. And in addition, by doing something called scanning, so by moving one's finger along the side of an object, you could approximate its shape and contour by when the sound changes and when it stops. So 2 really functional pieces of information that you can use the amp touch for. However, there were some, yes, sir?
How does he distinguish the impulse sounds and say, oh, this is less, and this is that? I mean, how does he, where's the signal from the impulse sound into his finger, and how is that reaching his brain to say, oh, okay, the sound sounds like this, feels like this, this sounds
Yeah, so
like that.
it's a headset.
Right, and?
It's a headset. It goes into his ears. So this is kind of based off of neuroplasticity. So he's interpreting the sound with sensory substitution. So he hears the texture. So like versus, yeah.
But yeah, so it did have function. And we'll get more into our future plans with it to kind of get to it. But there were some improvements that we had to make. One thing is that for this amp touch to give you any sort of information about what you're touching, it has to be in contact with the mic. So if an object is in contact with the mic and there is an amount of movement, it'll generate a sound that's unique to what you're touching. So when it does do that, you have to grip it pretty well. And the material that we cast the original device for John out of was relatively hard, and he wasn't able to grip objects with it that well and hold them there. So we are intending for our next variants to cast it out of silicone resin or another tacky sort of material so that items can be gripped well and they can be heard. In addition, we need to relocate the mic on the amp touch itself so that we're thinking something more distally and medially toward the side of the thumb so that it comes into grip when you naturally grip things. It comes into your finger. And finally, we'd like to add more microphones to the amp touch to create a sort of sensor array so that you can get a variety of sounds that inform you more about larger objects and things like that. So with respect to our plans with the device, we are currently preparing for an IRB submission for a study that has an increased sample size of both prosthetic users as well as able-bodied users to determine the real functionality of the device. And we plan on using a variety of psychophysical testing methodologies to determine the amp touch's ability to distinguish between different textures. So you guys, so we talked about the fabric swatches. This is kind of that concept. So our first idea was something like sandpaper grits. Can we use the amp touch, simply feel it, and from the information it gives you, tell you, okay, this is maybe closer, this is rougher, this is smoother, this is 110 grit, this is 150. In addition, we want to find out how well it's able to distinguish objects without visual feedback, the stereognosis testing, but just done in a more controlled environment. As well as now with the ability, we'd like to determine its ability to estimate density of objects. So overall, we'd like to quantify the functionality of the amp touch, but also further research in sensory substitution as a whole for tactile and auditory stimuli to see if this is a viable method to deliver information. So the overall umbrella of this is something called modality mismatch sensory substitution. So taking one sense and substituting it for another. And that concept is relatively underrepresented in prosthetic sensory research. And we hope that more research in this area could lead to innovative solutions that leverage this concept. It doesn't have to necessarily be touch and audio. It could be any of our 5 senses or even more. And swapping those could lead to interesting and innovative solutions.
So some of the healthcare implications for this is that we could possibly reduce the risk of phantom sensation. So whenever someone undergoes a traumatic amputation, the brain begins to very quickly rewire itself. So it undergoes cortical remapping, and then during this cortical remapping and rewiring is when they think a lot of like the risk for phantom sensation occurs. But there's also research that suggests that if you can provide some level of associative input into that area, it reduces that risk. So like you're kind of the neighbors of that part of the brain that processes like the finger or the hand. They take that over very quickly. So being able to provide it something can reduce the risk of phantom sensation. And then also, this potentially can increase the adoption rate of prosthetic devices by reducing the cognitive load whenever during the initial training phase. It can reduce the frustration, and then also just kind of giving it more of a meaningful piece to interact with can help during the initial training phase. And then also there's improved occupational performance and task efficiency. So occupational performance, kind of go on that real quick as an occupational therapist. Kind of what that means is it's like how you occupy your time. So that could be like your job, your work, your hobbies, folding your laundry, activities of daily living, things like that. So pretty much anything that you do in the scope of OT is like an occupation. So you can just see functional improvements. That's a possible benefit. And then also, this is it's a new tool. It's an inclusive client-centered tool that we have available potentially have available as clinicians to offer to our clients and patients.
So with our project's implication for open healthware, one thing that we focused on for this project is that we want it to be low complexity as well as high replicability, something that people can make for themselves and use. And when we did this, we wanted to ensure about its cost. The current cost we estimate to be about $50 for someone to make this themselves, made mostly of off-the-shelf parts, which are accessible and available. And an important one for Randy and I was that It requires minimal technical skills to construct. Randy and I are not engineers by any sort of state of the word. You know, I spent my last 2 weeks delivering babies, and Randy, and this was our first time ever soldering, you know, stuff like that. So the fact that our focus in trying to make it easy for us to make, I think also lends itself well to open healthware, that anyone should be able to pick this up and make it for themselves if it could be useful to them. And from the perspective of future clinicians, we hope that open source technology will increase its accessibility to users and clinicians. So a little bit of background about us is that in Galveston, we're about a 1-hour drive from the Texas Medical Center in Houston, which is probably one of the biggest medical centers in the world with some of the most cutting edge, bleeding edge research being done. But Galveston is a very different place where it's a relatively resource poor area that's very diverse. And having tools in our pockets, both Randy and I work at clinics, like a free clinic called St. Vincent's, and having tools like these could be really impactful for when people come to areas like this where clinicians are able to give alternatives. So some takeaways for us are that audio tactile sensory substitution is feasible. And from our results with John, this shows that this is an area of research that should be continued. And in addition, open healthware can improve access to care for patients. And a good thing for us is that limited engineering skills is not prohibited to get started. It doesn't require a degree, and it's possible to create something that does give function to someone without any sort of prior experience. And our goal for this project is an open source integrated solution. While we did use off-the-shelf parts right now for this variant of it, we hope to create an integrated electronic solution in the future, maybe when we develop a bit more engineering ability.
Just real quick on a kind of a personal note, you know, it's been really like empowering and inspiring and kind of humbling to be a part of this. You know, like as Vivek mentioned, like a year ago, like I could hardly even solder. And now I'm able, like I'm standing up here talking to you guys, and like we created this cool device. So just this open healthware like process, something that's going on here, like I'm just really you know, thankful to be involved with it. And then also seeing stuff like the open source leg, you know, like I could very easily see this type of product, our product, moving into that to contribute to research. So that's something I just never even thought of when I first started out with this.
Research and community. I really liked how open source leg talked about community. And finally, if projects like I know Alex and OpenNerve are able to do class 3 really strange things, I hope that projects like ours, a class 1, are able to make open source healthcare a reality. Thank you for listening to us. This is Francis Bacon, John's dog, getting some stereognosis testing.